Bonsoir Paris, je vais essayer de vous réchauffer pendant les 15 minutes qui viennent. I'm now going to switch to English. Although I was born in Neuilly-sur-Seine, 5 minutes away from here, I have been a professor in Oxford for the last 3 decades and a member of the House of Lords, the French, the equivalent to the French Senate, the upper house, for the last 18 months. So I'm going to talk about sovereign AI from a UK perspective, but then towards the end, talk about the European dimension as we see it. So, first of all, a quick summing up of how we've got to where we are now. What's happened in the last 40 years? Well, machine learning began 40 years ago in 1985 with the error backpropagation training algorithm. Why am I reminding you of that? It's because the paper was written by 3 people working in the US at the time, David Rummelhart, Jeff Hinton, and Ronald Williams. Machine learning was invented in universities, and it carried on the same way for the next 2 decades or so. Then the second generation, about the year 2000, we got deep learning, where the number of weights exploded because of convolutional neural networks at the input, and that was invented both by Jeff Hinton again on the kind of Anglophone side of things, and Yann Lequin on the Francophone side of things with his LeNet, which analyzed billions of zip codes in the US. And that created deep learning, still invented in universities. But in about 2010, companies moved in. Yann Lequin went off to work for Facebook, now Meta, and Jeff Hinton went off to work for Google. So companies came in about 2010, and things have never been the same since, as far as universities are concerned. Because I'm sure you know that the third generation, which we've heard about a lot today, generative AI, for example, frontier models such as large language models with billions of weights, were invented in a company. In 7 authors, I think the paper is 2017, not 2019, but that doesn't really matter. 7 Google scientists, all of whom have formed their own companies since. So the key thing there, it's universities no longer had much of a role because it was the current generation was invented in big tech companies. So with big tech companies dominating, and most of them in the US or China, what does that mean in terms of sovereign AI? And different countries answer that question differently. For example, where does the funding come from? Some nations, including here in France, rely on private investments, with Mistral, for example, here as the leading company in generative AI. Others have got sovereign wealth funds, and some countries invest directly government funds. The ones that have the most ambitious sovereign AI plans are China, which you all know about, but this is also true of the Gulf states. And in the US, it is a reliance on strategies to enable your own big tech champions to lead the charge without any direct government involvement, except removing as many barriers as possible, which is what the Trump administration is trying to do and has been trying to do for the last 6 to 9 months. So what does sovereign AI mean in the UK? Well, in the UK, the government set up a sovereign AI unit back in July, and it has 3 missions. First of all, investing in UK companies to support AI national champions. So UK startups, UK university spin-outs. Secondly, create and develop the talent and assets that you need, such as data, compute, and human talent, as we just heard. And thirdly, making the UK the partner of choice for frontier AI companies. That is the big US big tech companies. So I talked to the Minister for Science, Innovation and Technology about these 3 missions, and I asked him, did mission 1 not conflict with mission 3? And so his answer was to direct me to a place called King's Cross. If you've taken the Eurostar to London, you've arrived at King's Cross and Pancras, and behind the stations, you've got this new ecosystem where all the UK AI startups are growing. For example, on the right picture here, you've got a picture of Startup Labs, but the middle picture is the building of Google DeepMind. So what is happening in the UK AI ecosystem at King's Cross is an experiment where big tech, US big tech, is coexisting with UK AI startups. And we don't know how the experiment will end, but it is an interesting experiment. So let's now look at the three components that you need in order to have sovereign AI. And the same is true in France, Switzerland, Italy, UK. First of all, it was discussed briefly in the previous talk, you need the right compute capabilities. And there's absolutely no doubt that until recently, France was well ahead of the UK in terms of compute for AI. But in September, major US tech firms pledged £31 billion, so about 40 billion euros of investment to build AI infrastructure in the UK. And NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang came and shared a stage like here tonight with UK Prime Minister. And of course, because he wanted to sell as much as possible to the UK, he said that the UK would become an AI superpower. However, I believe that there are possibly alternatives to these power-hungry GPUs, multiple GPU data centers. There are more clever things that can be done, for example, using analog technology. Fractile is a startup come out of University of Oxford, or photonics that may one day replace the GPUs and TPUs that we have today. The next component to sovereign AI after compute is data. And here the UK has got several assets, including our National Health Service data set, because everybody in the UK is an NHS patient, and so we've got amazing primary care, secondary care data, and we also have images, genomic data, advanced diagnostics, and so on. So this is a unique data set, probably unequaled anywhere else in the world. Secondly, our broadcaster, which, as you may have heard recently, President Trump has picked a fight with. The BBC has got some amazing data sets with large collections of broadcast footage with associated metadata. And finally, a lot of weather data from the Met Office, which is not just nowadays using land and marine station data, but linking it with satellite data from Earth observation satellites. So the third component after compute data is companies. And what is the definition of sovereign AI in terms of sovereign UK companies? And one test that we could apply is to say, if we had two UK domiciled companies, each worth 100 billion, we could say that we had sovereign companies in the AI field able to compute with the US big tech. And in the UK, it's a missed opportunity because we could have had. DeepMind is a UK startup which is now worth $100 billion or euros, but was sold to Google for $400 million back in 2014. Likewise, ARM and all your smartphones, whether you've got iPhones or Android phones, I've got 7 or 8 ARM chips in them. ARM is also a UK company, but it was bought by SoftBank in 2016, soon after Brexit. So if the UK had managed to keep both of those companies, my argument is that we would have a sovereign AI capability in terms of independent UK domicile companies. But one of the aspects of having sovereign AI is to have your hyperscale, hundreds of billions of weights, large language models or frontier models. If DeepMind was still British, the UK would have its own sovereign LLM capability today. Now, as we've just heard, in Switzerland, Lausanne and ETH Zurich have collaborated together to release Apertus. Italy has got Modello Italia, France has got Mistral and Lighton, and the Dutch have developed GPT-NL. Now, my final 3 slides are, how about if we actually brought our strength together and built an Airbus of AI? To compete with US and Chinese, can individual European countries actually manage to do that, or do we need an Airbus of AI? You will all remember, I'm sure, some of you might even have been born in 1970, that Airbus Industrie was set up 55 years ago as a consortium of 4 core members: France, West Germany as it then was, the UK and Spain. And the idea was to compete with Boeing and Lockheed, the big American players. And the European aerospace companies and governments realized that it was impossible for a single country with its own aerospace industry to compete with the US. And so they set up Airbus Industrie with its first product, the A300, a wide-bodied, twin-engine, medium-haul airplane, which was phenomenally successful. But Airbus Industrie, it has to be said, had a product from day one that it was designing as part of these, the output of this consortium of 4 European countries coming together. Now, if we did the same in AI, pooling national resources, for example, I don't think it would be 27 countries, but it could be the UK of Switzerland, both of which are outside the EU, coming together with, say, France and Germany, then many people would argue then that Europe would be able to have the necessary scale to compete with US and China. It could be a public-private partnership, so you would involve companies like Mistral and other European companies to work with European labs, such as INRIA, for example, in France, Fraunhofer in Germany, the Alan Turing Institute in the UK. And the idea would be to train models for key European industries such as defense, finance, and healthcare, but the key thing being independent from the US and Chinese models. Because I'm sure we've all done it. We've distilled LLMs such as Qwen, for example, but even though you can distill these open source models, if you ask your distilled model what happened at Tiananmen Square in July 1989, it will not answer the question. And in order to have true independence, whether it's from China or the US, you need to have your own data sets with your own values and your own ethical constraints. If you want to have more details on this concept of Airbus of AI, there is a paper produced by a policy institute in Cambridge that you can see here, which discusses the concept and how it might be funded. So, is this a realistic concept? Well, I would argue that it is. We've made a start. When President Macron came to the UK for a state visit in July, he signed an agreement between Oxford, Cambridge, and Data AI and High Paris from Paris. And you can see the representatives of those 4 organizations signing the agreement here in London in early July before meeting with Emmanuel Macron. And we had our first meeting actually in Cambridge and Oxford last week. This is a picture taken from our meeting in Oxford, in one of the Oxford colleges last week, to make a start. So I believe it may be possible. We need agreements from the politicians top down, but also the bottom-up approach. If we begin to work together using European data, European values, focusing on industries that are important to us, there is a possibility that we might do this and be able to compete with US and China. Now, it took 50 years for Airbus Industrie to reach the top and become more successful than Boeing. We don't have 50 years to do this. Even 5 years is probably quite a long time. We need to make a start. We need to get going quite quickly. And I hope that as a result of Adopt AI, the conference today and tomorrow, there'll be conversations that allow us to move together to develop sovereign AI with a European dimension, European culture, European data, and European values. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lionel.